Good afternoon, class. It's late Friday afternoon, a Friday before Thanksgiving break. I'm going to take a few moments to record comments I didn't get to today in class. We were talking about the Abbasid dynasty and the tremendous cultural and religious flowering, economic flowering as well, of the city of Baghdad, which becomes the capital city of the Islamic world with the moving by the Abbasids from the previous capital of Damascus, which had served the Umayyad dynasty, to Baghdad, which will become the new Abbasid capital starting in the year 750 current era. And I just wanted to go back here briefly to allow you all to see where we were at today, and I'm just going to briefly move through here. We see this map helps tell the story a little bit, the dynamic story of the expansion and success of the Islamic world prior to the Abbasids, but also after they emerge. We can talk about the early Abbasid period from 750 to 945. This is the time in which the Abbasids are in dramatic and powerful expansion. The Islamic world is still doing very well in terms of harnessing its early energy, spreading its religion, spreading its culture, and really adding tremendous innovations in terms of knowledge and new technologies to the world around it. Today we left off, we were talking about the translation movement and how the Muslims, particularly during the Abbasid era, were just relentless gatherers of knowledge. They were fantastic at gathering the most cutting-edge information and knowledge about the world. In many respects, they were centuries ahead of Europe, where Europe was looking backward or looking superstitiously for explanations of the world around them. This is Europeans. The Muslims were very much scientifically examining and trying to add to their understanding, their knowledge of the world. And they did this by looking to the accomplishments of prior civilizations and prior societies. So the translation movement was in part an effort to gather up all the useful and advanced knowledge that neighboring civilizations might have to offer the Muslims of the Abbasid era. And this all came home to roost in Baghdad. There was a very special place known as the House of Wisdom, which was essentially the intellectual headquarters of the world from really, the 800s on. And this will remain true until the 1200s, when the Abbasids are forced to relocate their capital to Cairo, Egypt, due to disturbances brought on by the Mongols, who are a disruptive and powerful force in later world history. But it's during the translation movement that the Muslim world adds tremendous advances to our understanding of math. They adapt, essentially come up with the decimal system, which of course is so invaluable to our mathematic calculations of today. They invent algebra and also make many advances to our understanding of geometry. And all of this is going to be served very well by the fact that the Abbasids also adopt and utilize the paper invention that had come to them via China. And so they see paper as a very useful resource because it makes much cheaper the publication of materials. Paper is a much less costly material as, say, parchment and skins, which were used as sort of the writing substrate, or the surface upon which people recorded most of their findings prior to that. So paper has a critical role to play. So as far as Abbasid governance goes, we know that the Caliph plays a very critical role, and the Caliph is both a military, religious, economic, and political role. The Caliphs were very much all-powerful. They did not operate alone, however. They did work with a guiding body. The Diwan was, you can think of this as like a cabinet, which is a group of people that help advise the caliph in his decisions that help run and steer the course of the state. The vizier is essentially the prime minister or the executive person who is tasked with carrying out the will of the caliph. And so through these just basic instruments of government and power, the Abbasids were more or less able to thrive, particularly early on. They're going to also divide up the Abbasid realm into various provinces. Each province generally had a governor. We discussed this a little bit in our reading that was titled A Government Job. And in this process, the governors would be responsible for forwarding taxes, forwarding military soldiers for the benefit of the Abbasid dynasty. And this works very well for a time, but unfortunately, part of the downfall of the Abbasids will be that as they become increasingly strapped for cash and for wealth upon which to pay for the growing size of their government, they have to increase their taxes upon the governors of the various provinces within the Abbasid domain. Unfortunately, what this translates into over time is that the governors are able to essentially pay the taxes but demand from the caliph a greater level of authority. So in some ways it's as if the regional governors are selling greater freedom and power for themselves, and so eventually this is going to create an uncentralized location of power, which ultimately proves difficult. The ulama, of course, play a critical role. These are the educated members of society. They are important. They help drive the Muslim accomplishments of the arts and also help master the important religious documents, keep those sort of at the forefront of people's minds to help ensure that the Abbasid dynasty remains thoroughly committed to its Islamic foundations and its roots. And so they are a very important people, and they live with a certain level of prestige and honor. Below the ulamas and the elites, we see a somewhat typical breakdown of society. The overwhelming percentage of Abbasid Muslims were farmers, and they are integral, critical to helping feed and drive the economy. Although they would have participated in the everyday religious expectations, they did not experience much of a prestigious role within society. Merchants did surprisingly well within the Abbasid dynasty, largely because Muhammad himself was a merchant, and so the merchant role had maintained a certain level of status as well. And the merchants help hold together the various the farthest reaches of the Abbasid realm, so they play a rather critical role. It's also worth noting that merchants, as you sensed in the documentary that you watched for class today, merchants also utilize really some of the first checks that we've seen in world history. If you'll recall, Muslims, like their Christian brethren, do not charge interest, what the Bible refers to as usury. So the merchants wouldn't take out loans from one another. Instead, they would essentially leave checks, which were essentially a promise of future payment. And so this check was a critical way of holding together the Islamic, or I should say the Abbasid era economy. And there's a level of trust and faith implicit to that kind of arrangement, and that served the Abbasids well, that they could have that level of trust and faith. Here we have a picture of the harem, and I just want to make a point here. The harem consisted largely of the wives and concubines that the caliph might have had. The Quran limited Islamic men to no more than 4 wives, and they were required to take equal care of any additional wife that they added. So it was forbidden to, say, take a second or third wife if you are not going to provide for her emotionally, financially, and also provide for the space and the addition of her to your household. So there were some things that guided and required caliphs to be thinking in a disciplined manner about taking on multiple wives. However, there is also quite a bit of evidence that a caliph could also take on concubines, and if a caliph took on an additional concubine, the same standards of providing for her did not necessarily apply. However, she would likely participate in his harem. And it's worth noting there's a word down here that you can't see. It's called eunuchs. It's spelled E-U-N-U-C-H-S. And eunuchs are important. You may or may not know what a eunuch is, but eunuchs were soldiers of sorts, but they were more like courtiers, members of the court of the caliph. And what they would do is, this is kind of a graphic description, but eunuchs are men who have been castrated, who essentially no longer have their testicles. And this was actually a fairly common practice in the ancient world. We have lots of examples of this in China, for example. But the main purpose of the eunuchs was to allow for maximum loyalty. And so eunuchs, like I'm sure this gentleman here in the picture, were instrumental because they could be trusted to be around the female wives and concubines of the caliph because there was no threat that they could essentially pass along their genes and become a threat to the hereditary succession of the caliphs of the Abbasid era. So these are most of the most important things that I want to point out regarding the Abbasid dynasty. I will just close by saying that the ultimate demise of the Abbasid dynasty comes in part due to external threats. There are going to be other powers, groups within, some of which are Turkic or Turkish threats, a different ethnic group that was actually Islamic, that is going to ultimately overthrow or threaten the Abbasid dynasty. But probably more importantly, in the mid-1200s, the Mongols will arrive and pose a very disruptive, destabilizing force upon the Abbasid dynasty. So with that, I'm going to stop. I'm going to wish you a great break, and I'll look forward to seeing you on Monday. Actually, a week from this coming Monday. All right, have a great day.